Anyway, when she was full, he could start to feed himself. These 3 to 4 hours were so precious that he could only waste it on the bed and not on other places. If she really wanted to eat, he wouldn't mind bringing her out tomorrow afternoon to make it up to her. This time, the goal of buying things in the supermarket was clearer. In half an hour, she bought all the things and returned to the car. Feng Ling was really not a foodie in the past, but after living in China for a while, she found that she really missed a lot of food in China. Now when she thought of the hot pot to eat later in the car, she couldn't wait to go to the hotel immediately. When they finally arrived at the hotel, Feng Ling forgot all the things that would happen in the hotel tonight. She didn't care about being embarrassed and took the initiative to get out of the car to help him carry the things. She carried various vegetables and meat rolls in her hands and her face was full of expectation. Although Li Nanheng couldn't wait anymore, he didn't want to let her down. After returning to the room, he asked the hotel staff to bring up the induction cooker and the newly bought pot. In the end, he still helped her cook the hot pot. There was no chili in the hot pot. It was not Sichuan style but the kind of hot pot with stock. However, because it was too hot, Feng Ling's cheeks were still red and there was sweat on her forehead. She used her hand to fan her red lips as she ate. Seeing that her usually pale lips were red, Li Nanheng became more and more absent-minded. In the end, he simply left her sitting here to eat alone and got up to go to the bathroom. "Where are you going?" Feng Ling saw him get up and subconsciously asked. At the same time, she stuffed a piece of tofu into her mouth. "Take a shower. You eat first." Feng Ling nodded again. It wasn't until the sound of water came from the bathroom that Feng Ling's chopsticks paused. She suddenly remembered that she still had a tough battle to fight tonight. However, listening to the sound of water in the bathroom, the burning feeling on her face instantly became even hotter. She quickly put down her chopsticks and sat on the chair to think for a long time. She felt that her head and body were covered in sweat, but no matter how big this hotel suite was, there was only one bathroom. She was definitely too embarrassed to go in and take a shower with Li Nanheng. Furthermore, she was already full and couldn't eat any more, so she just sat here and listened to the sound of water in the bathroom for a while, feeling a little uncomfortable. When Li Nanheng came out of the bathroom, the man walked out of the bathroom wearing a dark blue bathrobe. His thin and cool short hair was still dripping with water. The water rolled down from the man's chin and submerged into the loose bathrobe. He was about to come over to light a cigarette when he saw that the induction cooker in front of Feng Ling seemed to have been turned off for a long time. Feng Ling, who had been eating earlier, was sitting there thinking about something. The man's good-looking brows moved. "I'm not eating anymore? And I'm full." When Feng Ling spoke, she was too embarrassed to look at him, even though she knew he was wearing a bathrobe. "All right. It's not easy to digest if you eat too much at night. If you still want to eat, I'll find time to take you out to eat tomorrow." The man picked up the cigarette box and put it down again, looking deeply at her. Even though the man didn't say anything or do anything, Feng Ling couldn't resist his burning gaze and quickly stood up. "I'm going to take a shower too." With that, without waiting for Li Nanheng to speak, she quickly entered the bathroom and closed the door. Hearing the sound of her locking the bathroom door, Li Nanheng curved his lips and raised his hand to casually tug at his still dripping hair. When he heard the sound of water coming from inside, he smiled. "Am I a terrorist with dozens of explosives tied to my body or what? What are you afraid of?" Feng Ling said in her heart. "If you were a terrorist with dozens of explosives tied to your body, I wouldn't be afraid of you," but his particularly patient and gentle tone. However, she still braced herself and walked over. As soon as she walked to the window, the man hugged her and touched the heavy equipment on her body. He lowered his head and saw that she was wearing a bathrobe and towel. He immediately laughed and stroked her wet head. "It's snowing quite heavily. I don't think we can drive back to the base tomorrow morning. You've been busy accompanying the people of the youth training team from morning to night. It's rare for you to take this opportunity to sleep in." "I don't seem to have the habit of sleeping in." Feng Ling looked away from the man's face stiffly and did not look at him. At this moment, the man's voice whispered into her ear and he hugged her tightly from behind. "That'll have to wait until you can get up tomorrow morning." Feng Ling did not want to speak. She stared at the snow outside and thought for a moment, but she suddenly felt a warmth on her neck. The man's kiss had already fallen. She felt uncomfortable and stiff, not knowing what to do. Her mind kept replaying the previous two experiences, but she found that the first time on the snow mountain she was completely stunned. She was so passive that she almost forgot the process and only remembered that it was very painful. As for the second time, at that time she was also at a loss. Li Nanheng drove her the whole time. She remembered that she was also in terrible pain at that time. Later she was so tired that she even cried under him. Her head was dizzy and she didn't remember what to do. Right now she stood there with her neck shrunk. She subconsciously wanted to hide, but she didn't want to resist. The man's kiss moved from her neck to her ear. His originally steady breathing gradually became hot and no longer steady. His slightly heavy breathing seemed to explode in Feng Ling's ears, causing her eardrums to tremble. He hugged her tightly and was not in a hurry to take off her bathrobe. He only focused on kissing her. For Li Nanheng, although he really wanted to throw her on the bed and get to the point, it was already a miracle that a man could hold on for so long in front of the woman he liked. There was no need for foreplay. But after all, he knew that Feng Ling's previous 2 experiences were almost forced. Right now, even if he forced himself to endure, he had to let her experience how he loved her well and give her enough time to prepare. The man held her and pressed her against the floor-to-ceiling window. In an instant, in front of her was a slightly cold window. She could still see the falling snow outside, but behind her was the man's hot and firm chest under his slightly open bathrobe. She was stimulated by this feeling of ice and fire, and all the hair on her body stood on end. She didn't know where she kicked, but she seemed to have kicked the switch of the floor lamp by the side. In an instant, the lights in front of the window dimmed and the lights behind them also dimmed. The neon lights and snow outside the window were even brighter, and the 2 people in front of the window were hidden in a charming darkness. In the darkness, Li Nanheng hugged her and kissed her non-stop. He kissed very attentively and gradually, her nervousness gradually disappeared. When the man turned her body around, she didn't notice when the bathrobe slipped off her shoulders. However, it only slipped halfway and the bathrobe was stuck on her arms. It was as though her arms were tied behind her back and she couldn't move. She moved, and the man took the opportunity to press her against the window harder and kiss her deeper. There was the sound of water intertwining in the air, causing Feng Ling's entire body to burn up. Chapter 1206. The room was very quiet. The falling snow outside did not disturb the silence. They could hear each other's breathing, heartbeat, and the touch of lips. The man held her face and kissed her. When he changed the angle, there was still a slight moist sound. Feng Ling tried very hard to breathe as usual, but it was useless. Under Li Nanheng's kiss and touch, her breathing gradually became more and more disordered. She was considered very tall among women, but Li Nanheng was able to easily cover her. His figure was strong and tall. The man held her in his warm embrace, demanding more. Feng Ling was completely driven by him, but this time he was obviously much more patient than that night in Tea City. At that time, he had drunk something dirty and his reason had been excluded. Now he was obviously trying to hold on to his reason. But this kiss was still gentle and lingering at the beginning, but it became deeper and deeper. He pried open her lips and teeth, rubbing and entangling, like a thirsty man drinking poison to quench his thirst, or like a man burning with fire trying to extinguish the fire on his body, but Feng Ling's gradually tentative response was not much cool water that could extinguish the fire, but oil poured on the fire, burning endlessly and smoke rose everywhere. She didn't know when her bathrobe completely fell to the ground. In the darkness, only the snow outside the window reflected a little bit of light, but it was not clear, and the sound of the man's Adam's apple moving was mixed in the air. Perhaps the bath towel wrapped around Feng Ling was too loose, or the man hurriedly undid his bathrobe and took her bath towel down with him. In this world in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, there was gradually an uncontrollable soft moan, but more of it was the man's excited gasp when he looked at her. Feng Ling didn't even notice when she was naked. Before she could adapt to the coolness of the window, she felt Li Nanheng's kiss gradually moving down her neck, then her collarbone and then down. Feng Ling let out a low gasp and leaned her neck back, but she could only lean against the window. She felt ashamed and excited by this wet and hot kiss. She blushed. Fortunately, it was very dark around, so the man couldn't see the burning color on her face, but she still carefully put her hand on the window behind her. Are we going to do it here? What? The man looked up vaguely and met Feng Ling's wet eyes. Li Nanheng originally wanted to hear Feng Ling's words clearly and wait for her to repeat it again. However, when he raised his head and glanced at her, the man who thought he could still hold on felt his scalp go numb. The blood in his head almost gushed out, and he could no longer suppress the fierce desire in his body. He kissed her, rubbed her, and hugged and kissed her for a long time. Panting, he slightly released her lips but reluctantly lowered his head to kiss her again. He asked hoarsely, "What did you say just now?" "I said, are you going to do it here? Don't you want to go to bed?" Feng Ling's heart was beating very fast. She didn't know how to find her breath in such a fierce kiss. After being kissed for a long time, she was already a little dizzy and her voice was also hoarse. "Here by the window?" Li Nanheng paused. God knew where he borrowed his reason to remember that she was thin-skinned. Although he not only wanted to do it in front of the window but also on the sofa, the table, the kitchen, the bathroom and everywhere else, in order to let her have a more peaceful experience, he patiently carried her from the floor-to-ceiling window, turned, and walked straight into the soft big bed in the bedroom. The last bit of light outside the window gradually moved away, and the direction of the bed was even darker. Some excitement that had been bred in his mind and body for a long time finally began to jump out of the cage. At this moment, the blood all over Li Nanheng's body was boiling hot. This was Feng Ling, his Feng Ling. The big river crab of life, please go to Weibo. He murmured hoarsely in her ear, don't be afraid. I'm not afraid, leave it to me. Be good. It'll be fine. It won't hurt anymore. The scene of that night in the snow mountain flashed in Feng Ling's mind. The man's strong and even somewhat hard muscles. Her own weak legs. The ice and snow outside the Rogers Pass, and the warmth in the tent. It was a dream that she didn't dare to recall even once. Suddenly it gradually became clear in her mind. She remembered that at that time, even if Li Nanheng's fever was severe, even if he was unconscious, he was calling her name at that time. Even if he was unconscious at that time, the person he wanted was always her. This was too exciting. Feng Ling's consciousness was hazy. She looked at the man on top of her and whispered something. The man suddenly bent down and sealed her lips hard. She had never seen Li Nanheng like this, even that night in T-City, when he couldn't find his reason, he didn't look like this. His eyes were red and seemed to be beastly, but he still stared at her passionately. Outside the window it was snowing heavily, and the air in the room was boiling hot. The man's sweat dripped down like magma. There was a gap in the middle of the curtains that was not closed too tightly. The light of the early morning outside shone in through the gap and was cast on the feet of the two people at the end of the bed. One of the slender, white legs and the pair of small feet were sandwiched between the other pair of slender, strong and thin legs. Under the light, the skin seemed to be exuding white light. Feng Ling had just been carried into the bathroom to wash. She didn't wear any clothes and was stuffed into the quilt by the man, who forced her to sleep in his arms. She was already in a daze just now. She couldn't remember whether she was crying or shouting. At this moment she was in a daze and wanted to fall asleep quickly. However, she could still feel the man holding her tightly in his arms. He pressed against her back and gently patted her waist as though he was comforting her from overexertion just now. She felt that although the man was holding her from behind and had helped her wash, he was ready to let her sleep. However, such a close posture still made Feng Ling drowsily feel the change in his unsatisfied part. She closed her eyes lazily. When the man held her more tightly in his arms, he gradually moved down, kissed her ear and neck and begged for mercy. Don't let me go. The man was in a good mood. Hearing her words, he smiled and kissed her shoulder, turned her over and kissed her. Feng Ling frowned and tried to push him away but couldn't. She had to open her eyes and look at him. He kissed her on the lips shamelessly and said vaguely, "All right, I'll listen to you. I won't let you go." Feng Ling. There was still a gap between her and the first place in the monthly votes, but it was already very good. Qingqing still fulfilled her promise. On Weibo, today is the last day of the month. Continue to work hard next month. Dear friends, you must give me the monthly votes today and tomorrow's first. In the future, I will try to find time to make up for the meet in T-City. Thank you for your support. Chapter 1207. He saw that she was so weak that she couldn't even lift her arms. They hung by her sides and her whole body was soft. He kissed her forehead and asked hoarsely, "Did it still hurt last night?" "It shouldn't hurt. At most your throat will hurt." The man's heavy breath was by her ear and his voice seemed to be moist. "You screamed so hard that you didn't sleep last night. It's all thanks to you." Feng Ling didn't know what kind of person she was usually. Under his body, the corners of her eyes were red, and she was trembling and panting. Sometimes she frowned and sometimes she couldn't help making long or high sounds that she tried hard to suppress. He couldn't control her like this. She closed her eyes and didn't move, but her ears were burning because of his words. Seeing that she couldn't continue to sleep, the man chuckled and said by her ear, "I let you go just now because you cried too hard, but it doesn't mean that I'm really done." Hearing this, Feng Ling abruptly opened her eyes and stared blankly at the man who was still not satisfied. She subconsciously tried to move away from his arms and tried to move forward, but the man gently hugged her and pressed her into his arms, unable to move. At the same time, Li Nanheng pulled her hand down. "You're still in this state after I helped you take a bath. It's all your fault." Feng Ling was angry. He had tortured her for the whole night, but he was still not satisfied. She grabbed the pillow under her head and was about to hit him. "You beast. I want to sleep. If you don't let me sleep, I'll shoot you." The man held her hand tightly and pressed it against his. Feng Ling's lips were blocked in time. For a moment, she couldn't say a word and only felt that the top of her head was steaming. "I can't help it. I've held it in for too long. How many years has it been?" The man continued to kiss her deeply through the gap between the curtains. He continued to kiss her neck, which was already filled with ambiguous red marks. He was almost intoxicated. After kissing for a while, even Feng Ling, who was so tired that she was about to collapse, could not restrain herself. This entire night, she had been constantly pressed by this man, and her entire body was still in a sensitive state. Although she was tired, she could not bear the slightest provocation, and the passion between the bed became stronger. Li Nanheng heard Feng Ling say something between their lips. Her voice was low, hoarse, tired, and a little embarrassed, but it was still the voice that tempted him uncontrollably in bed. "How many times do you want to do it before you're satisfied? The sky is already bright." Her voice was almost trembling at the end. Because of the man's movements under the blanket, her body trembled violently, and she was drowned in shame once again. At noon, Li Nanheng's cell phone kept ringing. Li Nanheng frowned impatiently. 2 seconds later, Feng Ling, who was about to get up, suddenly opened her eyes, sat up, and turned the phone to silent. She glanced at the caller ID, did not answer it, and threw the phone back to the bed. Feng Ling sank into the soft and fluffy quilt. She was usually alert, but this time she was not woken up by the ringing of the bell and was still sleeping soundly under the quilt. Li Nanheng didn't remember how many times they did it last night. He only saw a few used condoms in the indoor trash can not far away, and even the 3 boxes of Okamoto 001 had been used up. He also opened another spare box in another hotel bathroom. This morning he rubbed her under the quilt for a while and did it twice. In the end, Feng Ling almost fainted and could not even scream, but her cheeks were still so red that he could not find his reason. There was no way he could be merciful. Li Nanheng leaned against the headboard and touched Feng Ling's forehead. He didn't remember where he had heard that some women were particularly fragile. If they suddenly experienced too much passion, it might even cause them to have a fever and other symptoms of overwork. Of course, this kind of situation was rare, but he was very clear about what he had done to her last night, so he was more or less worried about her body. But under his palm, her body temperature was not hot, but very warm. At this time he couldn't help but think of the night on the snow mountain. It was her first time and she lay in bed for 3 days. Would she really be seriously ill at that time? She could endure it now, but she was in such a deep sleep that she wouldn't be able to hear or feel anything if the sky didn't fall on her. Seeing that her shoulder was accidentally exposed by the edge of the quilt because of Weiwei's movements in her dream, Li Nanheng lifted the quilt for her. After all, the weather was cold. There was air conditioning in the hotel room, but the air was still a little cold. Fearing that she would catch a cold or wake up from the cold, Li Nanheng lifted the quilt for her. Feng Ling instinctively hugged the quilt in her sleep, and her face was red. Before dawn he had carried her into the bathroom to take a shower, but after the 2 times he was afraid that if he helped her take a shower again, he would start a fire again. He was afraid that he would do it again, so he didn't take her to clean up again. Fortunately he used condoms so it was not too messy. But he was still worried in case Feng Ling woke up and lost her temper with him. The man gently reached into the quilt, touched her waist, and then continued to slide down to make sure that she was no longer sweating in the morning. He also confirmed that her body was very clean, and her skin was smooth in line with her usual state of love for cleanliness. However, after touching for a while, he pinched her slender waist hard, lowered his eyes to look at Feng Ling, who was almost unconscious, and kissed the tip of her nose. At this time the phone rang again, but it was the hotel landline beside the bed, not his cell phone. Li Nanheng picked it up, and the hotel staff's polite and respectful voice came from the inside. The reason was that the hotel had prepared lunch. Because they didn't have breakfast in the morning, they reminded them to eat lunch in time, lest they starved. Li Nanheng ordered lunch on the phone and asked them to send it over. He still remembered that Feng Ling wanted to eat hot pot. Last night he cooked it here himself because he was in a hurry. Today he had to find an opportunity to let her have a good bite of the most authentic local hot pot in Los Angeles, so he didn't order much for lunch in the hotel. Most of the food was easy to digest, in case her stomach felt uncomfortable after she woke up. Half an hour later the phone call came again. It was the room service who pushed the dining cart to the door. Li Nanheng got up and went out to pick up the bathrobe that was scattered on the ground last night, put it on and went to open the door. The hotel staff hurriedly prepared the lunch after ordering it, and it was still hot. For M. Seeing the words heavy snow-blocked road, Feng Ling hurriedly got up and got off the bed. However, as soon as she got off the bed, her feet suddenly softened, and she stumbled back onto the bed. After resting for a long time, she was finally able to get up. She walked to the window and pulled the curtains open. The moment she opened the curtains, she was almost blinded by the bright light. She narrowed her eyes and saw the plain white snow outside. Even though this was a bustling city street, she could still see the places on the buildings that couldn't be cleared by the snowplows. The snow on the main road in the city had long been cleared. On the ground, black and white patches of asphalt could be seen, and the snow was piled up on both sides of the road. Looking at the situation, it was indeed possible that the suburbs hadn't been cleared yet. After all, 11 Base couldn't be located in the city, but in the suburbs a little further away from downtown Los Angeles. No one would use that road except for the people of the base, so if it didn't affect the normal progress of the base's mission, it was understandable that these people didn't rush to clear this road first. Unless there was an important mission, 11 Base, a militarized place, would definitely put the people first. They could wait for the snow to be cleared in other places first. Feng Ling thought that it shouldn't be too far from here. If she got up early tomorrow and drove back early, she could return to the base before the morning training. The phone thrown on the bed vibrated again. She turned to pick it up. This time it was the weather forecast. It said that there would be heavy snow this afternoon. After reading it, she glanced at the message sent by Li Nanheng and replied, "I'm awake." After about 2 or 3 minutes, the other side replied, "It will probably take a while to go back. If you are tired, continue to sleep. If you are not sleepy, get up and take a shower. I didn't help you bathe later. You should not be too comfortable now." How could it not be comfortable? Li Nanheng was a man who was obsessed with cleanliness. Except for last night when he was crazy, he at least carefully washed her inside and outside in the morning. When he carried her to take a shower, Feng Ling almost went crazy. Later he continued to do it on the bed twice, but at least in the morning, Li Nanheng was not as crazy as last night. So she was very clean. There was no trace at all. But in the daytime she was discussing with a man about whether she was clean or not and whether she was tired or not. Feng Ling didn't look at his words directly but still replied with N. No matter how clean she was, she still had to take a shower. Last night she could still take a shower standing, but now she only had the strength to sit in the bathtub. She was relaxing in the bathtub full of hot water when Li Nanheng sent a message.